They slid the clearance across the steel crate like a verdict, and when Anna read Raphael Soler's signature on the classified stamp, her knees stopped being hers. The air in the cargo bay tasted like cold metal and the faint antiseptic of borrowed lives. The only sound was the rattle of a distant conveyor and the thud of her own heart trying to leave her body. "Necessary exchange," the officer said, as if names and cradle songs, the bedtime light that used to settle over her sons, could be balanced on a ledger. Anna's hands shook so hard she nearly let the papers fall. "You promised," she whispered, but the signature stared up like something that had always existed apart from vows. "Wait, before the next revelation unfolds. If this story has already captured your heart, let us know where you're following from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected twists, emotional reconciliations, or new beginnings, subscribe and stay connected." Now, back to the story. Raphael didn't meet her eyes. He stood with his back to the freight door, shoulders outlined by a halo of cold fluorescent light. Up close, he was the same man who had once taught her to read the constellations by tracing the arcs on the ceiling of their small apartment. His jaw still had that determined slope, the one that made her think he could shape a path through anything. But the grin that had made the stars feel like home was gone. In its place was a rationed calm, a professional's restraint thick as armored glass. "Anna," he said, and it sounded both apologetic and engineered. "You weren't supposed to be here." "You signed it," she said. She had to force the word out like it was a thing that could be papered over. "You signed it, Rafa. You signed our names away, and you expect me to stand here and—" Her voice broke. The bay swallowed it, indifferent. Two men in suits watched from the shadows, faces like polished instruments. A woman in a navy uniform clicked her pen, an almost sympathetic rhythm. "Who are they?" Anna demanded. "Who are the children in exchange?" "They're not in exchange," Raphael said too quickly. "Anna, those children—" He steadied himself against a crate. "They are diplomatic dependents. They were rescued. We owe them asylum. The agency—" His words fluttered and then folded under the shape of the truth he had been holding like a live thing. "We had to negotiate." The use of the word negotiate felt like a cruelty. Negotiation implied choice, that there had been room to argue, to bargain. Anna remembered bargaining. She had haggled over Weiss at markets, over hospital co-payments, over the price of a family photo framed in a second-hand store. You don't bargain with your children. You don't draft them into treaties with aliens who blink blue beneath a sky you'll never walk beneath. She thought of small things, Evan humming a clumsy version of a lullaby, Mateo's chipped tooth, the way both boys would press their faces against airplane windows and badger her with impossible questions about planets.
She thought of the playlist Rafa had made them for long drives, and how the boys had insisted on the opening track every time. Their ritual, their compass. Those rituals, those particular human textures of life, were the terms of the bargain, and they had been priced in a currency she hadn't recognized. "You hid it," Anna said, the accusation unadorned, raw. "You hid them from me." Raphael's eyes finally found hers. For a blink, she saw the man she had loved, his shoulders folding as if to carry something heavier than regret. A softness she had missed like air. "I didn't hide them to hurt you," he said. "I did it to protect them." "Protect them?" she laughed, a hollow sound that stuck to her throat. "From what, Rafa? From me?" The woman in the navy uniform stepped forward. "Ms. Marquez," she said, voice crisp, "we can arrange a supervised observation. You can see them in controlled conditions." Anna's laugh cracked into a sound that might have been a sob. "You're offering a viewing window, like they're exhibits. You signed clearance that transferred custody. That's not observation. That's abduction with a government stamp." The officer's face remained unblemished. "It's diplomacy," she said. "It's precedent." Mara stood with her hands tucked into the pockets of a lab coat, as if the garment could shield her from the human weather. She was slight, all angles and quick gestures, and there was a measured warmth in her face that didn't negate the authority she carried. A liaison, Raphael had called her in the old days with a boyish pride. Mara had the kind of eyes that saw code in grief and came away with equations. She had translated alien vocalizations into language for a living. She had spent nights indexing tears and laughter, trying to map an empathy the government would fund and the rest of the world would not yet understand. But there was something else in her, a pale indent at her wrist where an armband might have been, a secret marker of kinship to the protocol she upheld. When she met Anna's gaze, there was a flicker, not pity, but recognition, as if she knew the architecture of loss and had built her whole life to enter other people's ruins without disturbing the bones. "Ms. Marquez," she said softly, stepping closer, "we understand your pain. We will." "Will what?" Anna said. "Will you tell me why my sons are not in their beds tonight? Will you tell me whether they know their own names? Will you tell me if they sing our songs?" Mara looked away. The gesture was small, but it opened a seam. "They were brought from a site where—" She swallowed. "They were exposed to a contamination event. We couldn't risk them or the alien contingent. The exchange protocol is explicit." Her voice turned labored, clinical, like the sentence was a diagnosis she had not wanted to give. "We swapped those boys for 2 children who, scientifically, will save lives." "Save whose lives?" Anna demanded. The words were hot in her mouth now.
How many lives is my boy's laughter worth when written on a manifest? A man from the agency produced a tablet and swiped through images. Photographs of 2 children, impossibly pale, with liquid eyes the color of moonlight, staring from inside a containment pod. Notes describing neurological resonance, potential symbiotic adaptation, urgent need for inoculation study. The language was antiseptic on the screen. On another document, a header read, "Interstellar Binding Protocol, Classified, Authorized Exchange Only." Raphael's signature glowed on the PDF like a brand. "Raphael," Anna said, voice narrowing into a blade. "What did you tell them? Who promised you authority over our sons?" Raphael's face had shifted to an expression Anna had not seen since the first months after their marriage, when he would come home with wild plans for missions and blueprints for making the world safer. He was a man split down the middle, one side a father, with threadbare maps of teenage dreams, the other a mission officer who had convinced himself that sacrifice was a kind of currency. "We made a decision," he said. "A protocol was breached. There was a contagion vector. The alien contingent was at risk of being compromised, and if their people withdraw, Anna cut in. "Whose children die? Yours? Mine? The men who signed their names to form letters? I loved you because you said you believed in partners. Partners don't sign clearance for each other's bones." The officer in uniform cleared her throat. "Ms. Marquez, this is an operational matter. It is a family matter," Anna snarled, "and you used my family as collateral." Mara's hand hovered near her coat. It was an old habit, the fingers flexing around equipment she had imagined would mediate grief. Translator pads, consent forms, sterile empathy. "Please," she said, softer than the stoic official. "There are protocols we must follow." "I don't want your protocols," Anna said. "I want my sons." Silence settled like dust. The bay felt suddenly like a courtroom where the laws had been written in another tongue. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then, from somewhere behind the suits, someone began to wheel a sealed crate wrapped in reinforced polymer. The label read, "Foreign Dependent. Do not open." Anna's whole body tightened as if a hand had closed around her ribs. She thought of the years when Raphael would lift her into a dish of stars, when the future had been an optimistic arc. She thought of the small toothbrush with a superhero handle she had kept in the cup beside her sink, a child's artifact now a relic. She thought of bedtime songs traded across a million ordinary nights, and how easy it had been to believe they were immune to the world. "You could have told me," she said simply. "You could have told me you were making a deal with the galaxy. You could have told me that our sons were part of it." Raphael flinched, and in that flinch, there was a story he had not wanted to give over.
"There were threats," he murmured. "We had intel that—" "Intel doesn't justify erasing me," Anna said. "If you're trying to save the planet, why not tell me and let me help? Why take them away as if I would not fight?" Raphael's shoulders dropped like a man unstrapped. For a moment, the lines of command and the weight of years of silence crumpled into a boy again, small and pleading. "I thought I could protect them," he whispered. "I thought if I removed them from the exposure, if I handed them over to a program that could shield them, they would be safe." Anna's face flooded with so many things: fury, grief, a love that still hummed in her veins like an old song. "Safe from what?" she asked. "Permanent relocation? Memory rewrite? Experiments?" Raphael swallowed. His next words were not the pragmatic ration of an officer. They were raw, human, and trembled with a confession that promised fracture. From a future where they would be used as bargaining chips anyway. I wanted to keep them from being caught in that system. I thought I could control it. Mara's presence tightened around them, part protector, part interpreter. You must understand, she said quietly, that the exchange protocols exist because other species operate on different moral economies. We had no legal framework at the time. Raphael authorized temporary guardianship to de-escalate a potentially catastrophic diplomatic breakdown. Temporary, Anna echoed, like a prayer turned to ash. How long is temporary when the law is secret? They were games of language, the sort that bureaucracies played while people lived compressed and small within their margins. The officer produced another document, a stamped authorization, a set of time-limited clauses, the kind of paperwork that could make a parent into a plaintiff. Raphael's signature sat on it like the last act of a man who believed in sacrifice above all. Anna folded her arms against the cold. The bay hummed with mechanical indifference. Above them, a cargo scanner blinked with encoded lights, as if measuring worth in wavelengths. She felt the irrational edge of a decision forming, a point where grief could become something like action. If Raphael had thought he could shield their sons by engineering a silence, he had misjudged the thing he had removed, the sound of a mother's rage, which could become a map. I want their names back, she said. I want access, I want a transfer of custody. I will fight this. Raphael looked younger suddenly, the years compressed into a man who had to choose between the doctrine he'd constructed and the tiny hands he had once held. Mara watched him as if searching for a coordinate that would reconcile both orders. The officer folded the papers, a closed book being returned to its shelf. There will be hearings, she said. There will be procedures. Anna looked at Rafa, at Mara, at the crate that might contain 2 children whose faces she had memorized in snapshots on her phone.
Her decision was a thing that could not be undone, even as the first edges of it were still folding. She had traded a past of small domestic joys for a future. Her decision was a thing that could not be undone, even as the first edges of it were still folding. She had traded a past of small domestic joys for a future of conflict. She would either be complicit and letting her boys be traded into silence, or she would challenge an entire clandestine galaxy of policy and power. The dilemma settled between them like a carried weight. Anna could try to reclaim her sons through the system, trusting the process that had betrayed her, or she could take matters into her own hands and risk everything: public exposure, criminal charges, and the possibility of losing them forever if she was calculated. The cargo bay's fluorescent lights buzzed. Outside, the night sky was empty of visible stars. Inside, the world had just become a planet of choice, and Anna's first move would define the nature of the war she was about to wage. Anna's plan arrived like a seizure, sudden, unsanitized, taking her breath and leaving her raw. She imagined it in the same mechanical terms she'd once described bending steel. A force applied at the right point would make the whole thing give. She would go through the system until it snapped, or she would break into the system and take her sons back. Both options tasted like salt and iron. They escorted her out under the soft pretense of cooperation. Security cameras watched her heel prints as if they were proof she was being reasonable. The agency offered reassurances. Legal counsel would be made available, an expedited hearing if she agreed to a monitored reunion, psychiatric evaluation to ensure she was fit for custody battles. Anna accepted none of it. She let the men in suits load her into a government sedan and watched Raphael stand framed in the doorway, the halo of fluorescent light now a ring she could not step into. His expression had become inscrutable again, like a photograph with the gloss burnt away. He mouthed something, apology or command, and closed the door behind him like an eclipse. Outside, the city bore the late-hour hush of a metropolis that had been told everything would be handled. Anna felt the old engineer in her, methodical, stubborn. First, she would gather facts. Then, she would find the seam. Finally, she would pry it open. Her apartment was a museum of small resistances, a chipped mug with stickers from school plays, a stack of oatmeal-stained drawings, a child's hoodie hanging over a chair. She looked at them as if they were satellites orbiting loss. For the first time since she had learned to read structural blueprints, she opened a different kind of plan, a dossier she'd been keeping in the hollow of a false-bottom drawer ever since Raphael had disappeared on a mission 3 years earlier. It contained old passwords, encrypted messages she'd intercepted in the first flush of suspicion, and a small thumb drive labeled with their son's initials in a child's scrawl, EMMS. She had not used it yet. Using it would be an act of treason or of love.
In the tiny quiet of her kitchen, she did both. Raphael's signature on the exchange forms had been the key he'd assumed would lock everything. He'd believed bureaucracy could hide even the most human transgression. Anna believed documentation could also reveal it.
The thumb drive was not just photos, though there were many of those, but operational logs Raphael had once mocked as sacred paper. Timestamps, access logs, shuttle manifests. She fed the drive into old contacts, burned it through back channels she had kept alive from a lifetime of navigating municipal permits and contractors who knew how to make things disappear for a price. Within hours, a woman she knew only through a voice modulator called her back. "You have to be certain," the voice said. "There are real consequences. We could expose them, but that will bring down a system, and they will come for you." Anna pictured her boys' faces, pressed to glass, asking why. The thought of their small hands reaching for doors that would not open made her feel like she was being carved from the inside. "I need proof," she said. "I need to know where they are, and, if they're alive, what they are now." She moved like someone half awake. Grief can have a clarity all its own. She attended the mandatory hearing the agency permitted the following morning, a charade of legality where words were measured like currency. Lawyers in measured suits offered phrases designed to sound humane. The presiding judge, an appointee who had once chaired a committee on interspecies contact, spoke in the slow, careful prose of people who understand power and mean to preserve it. "Ms. Marquez," the judge said, "we understand your anguish. The agency acted in the interest of global stability." "Global stability," Anna repeated, tasting the syllables like poison. "Did you sign for my son's lullabies too?" The room held its breath. The judge's eyes flicked to the gallery where a lone camera rolled and a man in a blazer took notes. Outside, somewhere in the web of the agency, Raphael shepherded the narrative like a man shepherding a flock from a cliff, careful, convinced, isolated. His defense was clinical. Protocol had been followed. He argued that the decision fell within his purview as assigned agent with standing authority in field contingencies. He did not, in the hearing, describe the moment he had watched their sons asleep in a cargo hold under the hum of refrigeration and how he had thought of letting them wake to the world as something other than what it was. Anna's lawyer, an earnest woman with a small scar on her cheek, tried to turn the hearing into a human story. She spoke of custody rights, of maternal unfitness protocols being misused as an excuse for secrecy. She pleaded for supervised visitation and an immediate forensic audit of Raphael's decision-making. She made soft, righteous noises about transparency. But law moves like tectonic plates. It redistributes, slowly, often after irreparable damage.
The judge granted only a conditional, heavily monitored visitation, viewing through one-way glass, mediated by agency monitors, and limited to 10 minutes. The judge's hand slid a little of the system's illusion of fairness across the table, like a conciliatory gesture. Anna felt her chest hollow with disappointment that cut deeper than the raw edge of anger. The hearing gave her a sliver, enough to be bait. She agreed to the visitation, but only as a reconnaissance. She had learned to read blueprints for load-bearing walls. Now she read surveillance schematics and security patrol routes. She memorized guard rotations, downloaded shuttle schedules, and, most dangerously, tracked the transport manifest that matched the crate's serial number. The crate would move in 48 hours to a satellite facility on the outskirts, an area the agency used for containment protocol. Maps taught her where the blind spots were, maintenance tunnels beneath the compound, an old courier route that predated the current security overlay, and an air vent that waited like a bird in a rusting chimney. When she approached Mara that evening, it was with the soft steel of someone who knows how to build and how to dismantle. She met the liaison in a quiet cafeteria behind the compound's public relations offices. Mara arrived with a cup of tea and a face that was not unreadable now, but complicated, worn at the edges, humanized in a way that hinted at private grief. "You shouldn't be here alone," Mara said, her voice wrapped in a professional cadence that could not hide the tremor. "I won't be," Anna said, "unless you insist." Mara's eyes narrowed, not in judgment, but in calculation. "I've seen the files," she admitted, "in fragments." "Fragments," Anna echoed. Mara nodded. "The agency compartmentalizes. It's safer for them, less messy for the political fallout. But," she paused, looking at Anna as if measuring a structure's foundation, "there are things not everyone can see, not everyone would understand. The children we received, they are unlike anything we've cataloged. They're biologically vulnerable, yes, but also the reason I still come in at night." The words landed like a splintered plank. "You like them," Anna said flatly. "I've learned to love what I study," Mara said. "I translate grief into policy. I have watched those children sleep. They hum at night like wind in a hollow reed. It is not the same song as your son's, but—" She stopped, the unfinished sentence a lever. "I can help you see them. You must understand this may not return them to the exact sameness you expect. The exchange altered them. We adapted protocols to accommodate that." Anna's breath scraped. Altered how? Mara hesitated, her hands folded around the teacup as if needing something to anchor to. Memory is a porous thing when cross-species neurochemistry is involved. There are techniques we use to encourage recall, to map identity, but there is also technology that stabilizes those memories for consultation.
If you want to see them, really see them, you must agree to a neurological exchange protocol. It will let you speak to them in a way they can register. You might not like what you hear. It could be irreversible. Anna thought of Evan and Matteo learning the wrong names for moons, an alien lullaby carving over a human refrain. The idea of the boys drifting through new languages into strangers' songs was a terror she had not allowed herself to finish. Yet the thought of seeing them, eyes hollowed by someone else's mercy, was worse. Still, the chance to watch, to witness, to stand in the room and learn the shape of them was a thing she could not refuse. "I'll take the risk," she said. "I need to know what they are now." Mara closed her eyes briefly. "There are other risks," she said, softer. "If you push too hard publicly, the agency will clamp down. There are officers who will pursue you for any breach. There are things we must preserve for the greater." "Save us the planet?" Anna cut in. "Who drew the map to that greater good?" Mara opened her eyes and looked at Anna with a frankness that made the world narrower and sharper. "People who believe themselves to have the right to choose winners and losers," she said. "I disagree with parts of it, but I also know that you are not the only one suffering. For 2 days they made maps not only of metal and glass, but of feelings. Mara shared guarded data, the crate's serial number, the facility's transport schedule, the protocols for neurological interface. Anna shared the blueprint of a maintenance tunnel she had once fixed on a contract job. How it fed into a service shaft that would touch the facility's HVAC ducting for just a heartbeat's worth of time. They worked like conspirators, because they were conspirators, not against a foreign state, but against the way an institution had calcified into betrayal. As they planned, the emotional undercurrent braided tighter. Mara proved unexpectedly present in ways that had nothing to do with data. Her hand brushed Anna's when pointing out a corner where a camera blind spot opened like an apology. Her voice held a softness that seemed almost scandalous in the neon-lit cafeteria. Anna found herself remembering Raphael's old grin against the ceiling constellations and feeling a sour taste of guilt. She was building another axis of closeness with a woman whose life straddled duty and tenderness. Mara's loyalty to the mission had not been broken. It had only become more complicated. "You understand," Mara said once, "that if they are altered, the boys may not come back as they were. They may come back as something that demands new names." Anna imagined calling out different names in the dark of their bedroom and watching small bodies pause, estrange themselves, respond with something else. The thought filled her chest with an ache that narrowed into a spear. "Then they'll answer to me," she said. "Whatever their names are. I will still be their mother. That won't change."
Mara's hand tightened around the cup, then released it. "Then we proceed." They traced the movement of guards, planned for a window of moments, when the transport truck would transfer custody to the fleet logistics team, when the cage would move from cold storage into a short-term transit container. The plan was not a Hollywood heist. It was a mother's recent and raging improvisation, stitched with an expert's cold knowledge. They had maybe 31 minutes from the moment the crate left the cold bay to the moment it entered the sealed satellite. Anna slept like a person who had taken a sleeping pill of adrenaline, fitful, dreaming of small hands that might not remember hers. In those dreams, Rafa appeared as both villain and saint, sometimes with the grin that read constellations, sometimes with the cold signature on the stamped clearance that sent her feet to the floor. She woke knowing the first piece of real work would be reclaiming a child's face from a ledger, and that the ledger itself was defended by more than locks. It was defended by the kind of thing that loved a plan more than the people it impacted.
The evening before the extraction, Mara gave Anna a neurological helmet, an instrument designed to harmonize human biosignatures with whatever neural architecture the alien children possessed. "It will help them hear you," Mara explained, eyes steady. "It will also let you record and transcribe. There may be gaps. There may be shudders of static in the places you're hoping to find before. Do not be surprised if they don't recognize their own past." Anna slipped the instrument on like armor. It hummed with a small life of its own, an alien buzz beneath the plastic. In the cafeteria's dim light, Mara's face softened. "Whatever happens," she said, "if you find them changed, remember this. Identity is resilient. It bends but does not always break. Love can find the seams." Anna wanted to say something vast and resurrection truth-laden, something that might erase the guilt and the loss and the complicated complicity of the man who had signed their names away. Instead, she simply kissed Mara on the cheek. It was a small human contact. Mara's skin was warm. For a second, Anna let herself imagine a future where three people, one broken, one repentant, one morally conflicted, could bind into a fragile constellation that might guide two boys home. Outside the compound, the transport truck idled like a patient animal. Inside the agency, the gears of containment turned, and a man at a desk stamped another piece of paper, assuring himself the mechanism would hold. Anna and Mara, two women who had nothing to lose but the inherited right to be called reasonable, ready to take on that machinery. Between their plans lay the honest, red truth of the stakes, a mother's claim on the small, human sound of her son's voices. At midnight, under the indifferent watch of cold lights, they moved. They moved like ghosts, two silhouettes stitched together by purpose.
The maintenance tunnel smelled of oil and old rain. The metal under Anna's palms was cool, the same cool she had felt on the scaffolds of buildings she had once salvaged. Above them, boots shifted and radios murmured. The crate moved with the slow inevitability of a thing that had been counted and signed, its transfer manifest synchronized to the minute. Mara's tablet glowed under a low red light, mapping cameras and guard sweeps in a loop that felt bizarrely like a lullaby. 32 seconds to blind, she whispered. Her voice was small, fierce. When it moves from cold storage to transit, the loader wings a camera for 3 seconds to calibrate. That's our seam. Anna counted the seconds like she had once counted bolts for a rivet job. Each small mechanical thing felt sacred. The click of a latch, the soft whir of a conveyor, the nervy hiss of the climate regulator as it cycled. She thought of Evan's chipped superhero toothbrush and Mateo's insistence on humming their ridiculous playlist. She imagined the boys inside a crate, pressed to polymer and white noise, their mouths making small, unknowable shapes. Her hands shook, but did not slow. They breached the seam with the careful violence of people who believed they had nothing left to lose. The loader's camera blinked, a maintenance alarm chirped, and a red LED traced a line of attention away from the corridor they needed. Mara's fingers danced, rerouting a feed with an efficiency that made Anna ache with admiration and a new, dangerous intimacy. The crate was smaller than Anna expected, the polymer shell humming with climate control. When they opened it, a breath of air smelled faintly sweet and wrong, like orchards after a storm, a scent Anna couldn't place, but would always remember. Two small heads turned toward her at once. Evan was thinner, his face elongated, as if someone had stretched a photograph. Mateo's hair had lost its familiar mischief, it lay like a foreign field. Their skin was paler, translucent almost under the fluorescent light, and there was a film over their eyes that caught and split the bay's light into slivered moons. They did not blink with recognition. Instead, they looked at Anna as if she were an actor on a stage they had not expected to see. "Mama." The word left Anna's mouth like a prayer she had not decided to offer. The helmet Mara had fastened to her temples thrummed, translating neural harmonics into a shape the boy's alien-adapted brains might accept. It was meant to bridge, to coax a signal through. In the hush that followed, Evan's small mouth formed a sound that matched the cadence but not the vowels of the lullaby Anna knew. It was wrong and heartbreakingly close. Mateo reached for the crate's edge with a hand so familiar Anna's knees nearly buckled. He had her bone structure in his fingers, the way the knuckles nodded. But when he spoke, the sound was not hers. It rolled through the helmet into a voice that layered alien vowels over human consonants.
"Cell," he said, an approximation of mom in a dialect she did not recognize. The translation hummed into her ear like static, that sometimes resolved into a name she could almost grasp. Her own name came back as a foreign thing, with an extra syllable a ghost had added. Anna's chest broke open in a way she hadn't expected. The boys were there, flesh and pulse and hands that had once held onto her fingers during thunderstorms. But the lenses of whatever the agency had done caught their memories like netting, reshaping edges into a pattern that suited another species' economy. The helmet offered recordings mapped to their neural responses. It showed snatches. Evan at a window watching a sky that pulsed in stripes he could not yet name. Mateo humming a tune that slid into an alien cadence. There were gaps the device filled with an algorithmic approximation, notes the brain made leaps to or away from. Did they? Mara began and stopped. She had been present in 1,000 experiments that probed identity. She knew that the violence here was not just physical. They matched host synapses to xenoneurotemplates, she said. It was supposed to be reversible, temporary scaffold. We didn't expect. Her voice broke into a technical hush. We didn't expect such deep affinity markers. They looked at each other. Anna stripped moi, and Mara, whose clinical language was softening into grief. Affinity markers? Anna repeated. The words were cold description for the way her son's eyes avoided hers. What does that mean for who they are? It means their brains have built bridges, Mara said. Cross-species bridges. They interpret human touch but overlay alien mnemonic structures. Their senses now map to other environmental cues as well. Her eyes found Anna, bright, earnest. We did this to preserve them during the contamination event. We thought it would anchor them. In doing so, she stopped, and the sentence hovered like glass. We may have given them an expanded identity, or overwritten something. Anna's scream rose without sound, caught by her ribcage and reshaped into a decision that had already been ticking like a dropped clock. She crouched to meet her sons at their eye level, which felt like stepping toward a different gravity. Up close, the boys still smelled like them. The faint toothpaste tang, the sticky residue of a morning cereal, the warmth of shared blankets. Such small, indelible things made her hands clamp on them like shackles. Evan, she said, slow and deliberate, trying to treat the syllables as a bridge of their own. Evan, do you know me? Do you remember? The helmet shivered, the device throwing up visual overlays of childhood, birthday cakes, scraped knees, a first lost tooth that had been placed under a pillow. The images were like spliced film, sometimes matching the boys' reactive flickers, sometimes replaced by alien vistas, a pale ocean with tendrils of light, an atmosphere that tasted of copper and grief.
Evan's eyes clouded, and for a moment, a human flash crossed his expression. Recognition, a spark. Anna, he whispered, but the name had been filtered through templates that made it both intimate and other. He reached for her face and touched her cheek with a gentleness that nearly floored her. His fingers trembled with an affection that was undeniably theirs. You are my home, Anna said, the words feeling overlarge. They had taught her that a declaration could reconstitute meaning. Evan bent his head and mumbled something into her palm, a new name, bent around tenderness. Tears came, hot and inevitable. She accepted the new syllables like a treaty she hadn't been invited to sign, because they were coming from the small mouth she had birthed. Mateo, however, recoiled, an emotion like fear. He stilled and looked at Anna with an expression that was not fear, but confusion folded with a loyalty to directives he did not understand. A faint, patterned residue of alien training flared across his eyelids. He did not step forward. Instead, he wrapped his arms around a small, smoothed object inside the crate, an artifact that looked like a shell, humming faintly with organic light. Mara's jaw tightened, and she moved closer, but Mateo's face shut like a book with missing pages. The helmet recorded static where Anna wanted a chorus. It registered a spike of fear in Mateo's limbic response that the translation software flagged as protective protocol activation. At the edge of Anna's hearing, the tech whispered possibilities she could not bear. Memory scaffolds could be reinforced, neural templates could be decoupled, but every act had a side effect measured in fragments of identity. The more aggressive the decoupling, the greater the chance of erasure, of memories that would not return. Anna's world condensed into two options: rescue them whole but present, accept the new hybrid versions of her boys, or strip away the scaffolds and risk losing pieces in a surgical pruning that might render them someone else entirely. Either way, she saw the shape of Raphael's signature carved into their futures like a branded map. Her anger flared, not at science, not even fully at the agency, but at Raphael. She wanted him to stand there in the bay with the cold fluorescent halo and answer, to explain in a voice that would not be buffered through legalese. Instead, he arrived in a different tide, not with command, but with the raggedness of a man deluded by guilt. His face was gray in the servo light. He walked a careful line between official proximity and private devastation. I authorized the exchange to get them out of exposure, he said without ceremony. There was no clean option. There was pressure from above, orders, intelligence. He sounded like a man reading a list of sins. We believed the Xeno protocols would be reversible. We believed we were buying time. Buying time for who? Anna asked.
For the agency to decide whose children matter. Raphael's hands were uneven. He looked suddenly smaller than the man who had once promised constellations. For everyone, he said, and there was an honesty there that split her open. For Earth, for contingency missions. There were talks, exchanges of personnel, of dependents. They offered us inoculation models. The alien envoys required parity. I thought... His voice broke and dropped below function. I thought if I handed them what they wanted temporarily, they'd leave my boys safe with us later. I didn't imagine our own bureaucracy would ossify around that decision. Betrayal had many shapes. This one felt like time itself folding into a ledger. Anna's fury roared and then narrowed into a knife. You signed our sons away to be chess pieces in a diplomatic endgame, she said. You didn't inform me. You didn't ask me. You made them collateral. Raphael closed his eyes, and for the first time his defenses cracked in a way that made him heartbreakingly small. I tried to protect them, he whispered. I thought I could control the outcome. I'm sorry. For everything. The apology was a physical thing, but apologies cannot unmake signatures. Mara's presence became the hinge in the argument, an arbiter who ought to have had loyalty to neither, but whose loyalties were beginning to show like underpaint. There was another element, she said, voice balanced on an edge. We found evidence, files, logs, indicating other children, human or cross-adapted, were moved off-world under classified mission designators. Her eyes flicked to Raphael, then away. We do not know the scope. Anna's world tilted. You mean other families? Mara nodded. There is a pattern. Exchanges formalize. Some are documented. Others are obfuscated. The agency has been negotiating for assets we barely comprehend. A cold dread climbed Anna's spine. The horror was not only personal now, it was systemic. Her sons might have been spared or sacrificed within a program whose architecture normalized disappearances. Her fight was suddenly no longer merely to reclaim 2 boys, but to peel back the institutional membrane the way one might pull bandages to reveal a wound. Then you will help me, Anna said, voice iron-wired. You will bring those files. We will expose this. Mara hesitated, and in that hold of breath Anna saw the fracture widen. Mara's life had been built on translating grief into policy. To expose meant to upend every negotiation she had ever mediated. If we expose this, she began, the alien envoys will react. There will be diplomatic fallout. There could be retaliation. The agency will denounce you. They will use legal force. They will call me irrational, Anna said. The thing she had never wanted to be, unreasonable, hysterical, loomed like a possible weapon. Let them. I would rather be called a million names than let other parents lose their children into a ledger.
Raphael watched them, Anna and Mara, standing back to back like 2 poles on which the future might hang. If you go public, he said quietly, I will lose everything. I will lose my career. I will lose your trust. But maybe you should go public. Maybe the world deserves to see the ledger. Mara's fingers tightened on the empty cup in her hand. If we do this, some lives may be endangered, she said, and the words were not a threat, but a truth. Exposure will provoke hard responses. The alien delegates will demand leverage. They will not like secrets revealed. Anna's decision glimmered then in a new light. The ethical calculus expanded beyond her sons into a network of potential sacrifices. She had been reduced to a moral point on a much larger map. She could continue to try to pry her children back in the dark, risking their erasure. She could go public and risk them being used as pawns in a war of accountability. Or she could make a bargain, use the device to attempt to deconstruct the scaffolds and hope enough of their humanity remained. Evan reached for her hand again, murmuring a name Anna had not taught him but felt like a future. Matteo kept his fingers clamped around the shell, his small knuckles white. The helmet hummed, impatient, an instrument waiting for permission to act. I will not bargain them away again, Anna said finally, the words thin and absolute. I will not let them be erased for an abstract greater good. If the choice is between a secret that preserves a lie and the world knowing the truth, then the world will know. If we have to dismantle the program to get them back, we will do it. If we must erase to rebuild their memories, we will, only with consent and with the full knowledge of what we might lose. Raphael's face registered the rawness of the decision. He stepped forward, the old authority and the new shame colliding. Then let's tear the ledger open, he said, voice raw. If this is a pattern, I can give you access. There are archives on a remote server. Mara's eyes widened. You would do that? I would if it's the only way to make amends, Raphael said. Not because I deserve it, because it's the right thing. The admission was a fragile bridge. Anna looked at him, then at the two boys who might no longer be the exact echoes of past joy. In her chest, grief and fury braided into resolve. There were fractures here that might never fully mend, the betrayal of a signature, the bureaucratic calculus of lives, the alien invasion of intimacy. But there was also a spark of something dangerous and tender, the possibility that love, when sufficiently wrung, could become a kind of truth-telling. Outside, the facility's night hummed on as if nothing had changed. Inside, a mother pressed her forehead to polymer and listened for familiar rhythms that might survive the grafting of alien memory. Around her, two people whose loyalties had been fractured in different ways began to gather the fragments of a response.
They had pulled the crate open and found the boys. They had found evidence that the program stretched further than one exchange. They had found a helmet that could both heal and harm. The fractures in the relationships were loud and living. Only the next desperate acts could tell how those fractures would be healed, or whether they would harden into irreversible breaks. Anna breathed in Evan's curious scent, the outline of a small hand making small claims on her palm, and let herself decide, not to surrender to the ledger, not to accept the management of grief by people who favored expediency, and not to let the signature that had stolen her sons be the final word. I will expose them if I must, she said, low and steady. And if we cannot bring them back whole, we will rebuild them with truth. Raphael's answer was a raw sound that could be an agreement or a plea. Mara's hand found Anna's in a brief touch, solid, warm, part truce, part conspiracy. Beyond the compound, the night held its breath. Inside, two boys dreamed in twin languages, and the program that had thought it could balance hearts on a ledger had finally been cataloged, not on a spreadsheet, but in human faces that refused to be erased. They moved faster than the watchman expected. Faster because grief lends velocity to limbs. Faster because two women who had nothing left to lose know the routes that fragile things take through machines. Mara's tablet was a cathedral of hacked permissions. Raphael's back-channel codes were the keys to its doors. Anna watched him stand at the terminal, fingers trembling as if he were playing the last song he'd ever let himself hear. Above them, the agency's servers thudded like a sleeping animal. Beneath, the archive they'd hidden for years breathed like a held secret. Once we push this live, Mara said, voice thin, the envoys will respond. They will demand an explanation. They will not be civil. Raphael did not flinch. Then let them not be civil, he said simply. There was no contrivance now, no polished officer's cadence, only a man whose hands shook with raw resolve. They have the moral right to ask. We have no right to answer with silence. Anna pressed her forehead to the humming screen and let the password she'd carved into memory slide out of her like a prayer. The archive opened, a raw, bright wound of files, manifests, exchange logs, diplomatic cables threaded with euphemisms and razor-sharp decisions. Images scrolled, children, sometimes smiling, sometimes not, linked to coordinates stamped off-world. The program was larger, older, and more brutal than anyone had imagined. Names that had once been private were laid bare like bones. They streamed everything. Raphael's codes bypassed the agency's throttles. Mara's translations rendered the dry euphemisms into the human nouns they had meant to hide. Anna watched the first feed push into public space, the ledger of 1,000 small betrayals, while servers flared and alarms skittered like startled birds.
The compound understood immediately. Red lights strobed, doors sealed, voices rose into alarms. Someone shouted Raphael's name over a command channel. He did not run. He closed his laptop and met Anya's eyes. And in that look was everything that had happened between them: love, rupture, and a kind of penitent courage. "They will pin this on me," he said, a fact stated without pleading. "I can take it." "No," Anya said, the word landing like a hand on his mouth before he could speak. She thought of the signatures, of the ledger's cold permanence, of the way he'd tried to buy safety with their sons' names. She also thought of the man who had traced constellations on a ceiling for her and taught small boys to ask questions about horizons. The truth had a weight that could crush them all unless someone took a stand and bore it plainly. Raphael stepped forward and did the thing that would unmake him inside the rigid world he'd built. He turned the microphone on. He told the truth with the rawness of a man unpacking his own shame. He read the logs he had once signed, line by line, confessing motives, errors, the pressure from envoys, the miscalculations. He explained how a ledger had become a moral instrument instead of a bureaucratic tool. He did not justify. He bared. The confession was a salt spray. The world heard. The envoys demanded emergency parley. The public demanded accountability. The agency spokespeople began to stammer into prepared statements. But the humanizing of a signature, watching Raphael's throat move as he uncoiled his own guilt, changed the tenor. It forced faces to look up from their desks and see the people their policies had cost. Security came for him fast. Agents moved like train storms. Raphael raised no hand in defense. He met each restraint with something like resignation and with a single small request. "Promise me you'll stay together," he said to Anya, voice breaking in a way that no formal memo could replicate. "Rub the pages of their childhood into whatever things we can reconstruct. If I go down in the ledger, let the rest of us survive." Anya's anger was a living thing, but so was the ache beneath it. Standing in the flood of emergency lights, she took a step closer to him and, in an act that was both forgiveness and acclaim, kissed the forehead of the man who had erred so monumentally. It was not an absolution. It was a pilgrimage. He placed a hand on her knuckles as they cuffed him. "Come find us," he whispered. Mara's hand found Anya's then, an answering pressure, less complicated and steadier. There were no dramatics, just two women collapsing the distance the world had tried to define between grief and duty. "I'll stay," Mara said. "I will stay with the boys. I will advocate in every forum I can. And when the hearings come, I will testify to what we did and why. I will not let them be erased." The extraction had become a public mutiny. The uploaded archive triggered an outcry. Parents rallied, ambassadors demanded sessions. A bloated apparatus hiccuped under the weight of its exposure. In the chaos, Anna and Mara moved like caretakers through a storm. The boys, fragile and luminous with hybrid memory, were placed in a safe room converted into a nursery. Mara stayed at their side, reading them alien lullabies and human fragments, until the names that mattered nested back into place, if only for small islands of time. At dawn, Anna sat between them on a mattress, the pale light of a new day sifting into the room. Evan leaned into her, an odd hybrid lullaby curling from his small mouth, while Mateo clutched a pulsing shell against his chest and watched her with a wary love. Outside, the city's new attention had not yet resolved into policy. The agency's machinery would retaliate, litigate, rewrite. Raphael would face consequences that might be legal and certainly public. Later, when she had to go to the hearings, to be the face of a mother who refused to be a commodity, she kissed Mara with more than gratitude, a soft, fierce thing that bound them by the night they'd chosen. The kiss was not a promise of forever. It was the vow of this moment. We will keep the small people in the world. We will keep our hands on them. From a distance, watched by cameras and by people who would later argue about ethics and duty, Raphael was led away. He turned once and looked at his family, not as an officer receding into protocol, but as a man making a sacrificial ledger entry with his life. It was not a heroic death. It was a relinquishment of power. He had chosen to trade his career for the truth. That choice would cost him everything that had defined him. It might, in time, buy back what mattered most. Anna did not know if love would return to the shape it once had. She did not know whether her sons would reclaim every small human thing that had been altered. She knew, with a steadiness that had the shape of something hard-won, that they had refused to be ledgered into silence. She and Mara had carved open the institution's wound and let the world look. In the light that followed, two boys hummed hybrid songs into the air, and a mother learned to listen to the new music as if it might someday fold back into the old.
The sky outside the compound was washed in copper and pale blue. Raphael's silhouette receded into a vanishing point. Anna pressed her forehead to Evan's, feeling the pulse of a child who had carried other worlds inside him, and who still, heartbreakingly and irrevocably, answered when she called. There was no triumphant harmony. There was instead a fragile chorus, a man who had sacrificed his standing for truth, a liaison who had chosen empathy over protocol, and a mother who had planted herself like a stubborn root. The stars above, indifferent and indifferent no longer, watched as the human heart negotiated with a universe that had once been allowed to trade in children.
In the quiet aftermath, Anna learned that love's largest acts are sometimes the ones that let go first, so they might be able to gather again, differently, around what mattered most. Morning turned the compound's windows into sheets of thin gold. The hearings would come, and the world would argue about ethics and treaties, and whether Raphael deserved ruin or mercy. Anna didn't live in arguments anymore. She lived in the small, sticky realities of breakfast toast, of 2 sets of mismatched socks, of a chorus of hybrid humming that sometimes threaded through an old lullaby. Mara stayed by their bedside, a translator of sorrows and a stubborn midwife of memory. Raphael took responsibility in public, and privately began to show up in ways he had once promised, quiet, repentant, rebuilding trust like scaffolding. The program was dismantled, its ledgers exposed. Some officials were indicted, others vanished into deniability. Families reunited in ragged, imperfect ways. Some losses couldn't be repaired. For Anna, repair was a daily craft, teaching Evan the syllables of his first name until they no longer sounded like borrowed light, baking the superhero cake that Matteo demanded even when his tastes wandered toward alien spices. Love here was a patient engineering, small repairs, stubborn fixtures. At night, when the city exhaled and the boys fell asleep to the tremor of 2 lullabies braided together, Anna would press her forehead to Evan's and let the hybrid song wash over her. It was not the music she'd imagined for them, but it was theirs. And in that imperfect inheritance, she found a quiet, vast hope that even after signatures and bargains, the human heart could redraw its map and keep its children home.